Okay. Okay, everybody, let's get going. All right, check, check, check. Here we go, here we go, here we go. We're just not doing a lot. Okay, okay, let's get going. So, hello everybody. We are back. Our last gasp, hopefully you're feeling a little bit of what I'm feeling right now, which is exhausted in a really good way. That way you feel when you've been with some really good friends, you've been in a really great experience, you're just, you know, just kind of happy to be alive, because that's kind of where I'm at right now. But I imagine you're probably pretty drained, just like I am. But I do want to push on for a while to talk about kind of the now what, because there is absolutely in this room, and it's obvious every time I've talked to anybody in the last 2 days, that people are excited, they want to do things with this, there are things already being done with this, so there's a lot of people in this room that are, you know, totally inspirational to me. But what I want to make sure we do, what I want to do and invite people that might be live streaming this with us, is to think about, if we've identified some of the ways to be visible, valuable, and vital, and we've identified through a lot of the great projects we've heard the last 2 days, some of the ways we can actually put this into real world practice in schools. How do we keep that going? How do we build capacity with each other? How do we create that community that we know is vital? You know, much of what you just heard from the Hanover folks, I would say again, obviously they're very talented and they're very good at what they do, but they also put a lot of time and attention into building their own community. And I think that's something that's hard sometimes for us in schools to do, because we are often lone wolves in our setting, or we're on teams that aren't particularly organized or functional. So how do we together collectively, and the people that aren't here that are interested, how do we build this and keep going? And that's always been the point of this and moving the field forward. So I'm going to offer some thoughts based on things I've heard today and yesterday. I'm going to introduce a few new things that might get you thinking further about, okay, yeah, I could maybe try that. And then I'm ultimately going to invite you to think about what might be 3 areas that you might want to look at with us this year. And so if you want to cheat and go ahead, you can go to the forum page right now. There is a title of it. I'm just going to come out of this for a second and show you what it is, because I know if you're anything like me, you're somebody who fidgets and would be looking at this anyway. So let's just look at it together. PLC topics for 2017 to 2018. These are 8 topics that our PLC community project has identified. They're not the only topics, but they're the ones that I've settled on based on some of the expertise of the people in this room, some of the people that have spoken the last 2 days. The first is restorative practice. The next one is Calm Classroom, Mind Yeti, other mindfulness interventions. The third is collecting and using relevant data for your school mental health practice. The fourth one is developing clear referral and criteria procedures for school mental health services. The fifth one is using a time study tool for your school mental health practice. Your sixth is school-wide needs assessment to build better systems in schools. The seventh is, and this one I'll speak about in a few minutes, enhancing classroom management and function-based thinking via teacher consultation. And the final one is a fairly broad one, but one I'm excited to see if people are interested in, studying visible, valuable, and vital best practices for school-based clinicians. And as you all were talking and hopefully sharing some resources from the forum, there's a lot of really good examples that people are doing using data. Wonderful resources. I can't wait to go look at some of these online resources. A lot of them I have never heard of before, and that's good because that's helping me realize that I need to always stay current with all of you. So these are 8 things. Again, not the only ones, but for the purposes of this forum, I would ask that you at least go in the next hour or so to this forum, type in your top 3. All right, you don't have to type them all out. Just type 1, 2, 3. Just pick the number and put what it is. So if you had restorative practices, you'd have 1. Time study would be 5. Classroom management would be 7. Just type it in like that. If you have any other ones that you have a burning desire to tell us about, please do. Part of the promise, so I'll answer my own question of the now what. Part of our promise to you is, as a PLC project team, we plan to take this data and meet in September, take a little break, meet in September and look at it and say, okay, what do we want to do with this? How can we offer this professional learning community experience to all of you? And what that may mean, I don't want to predict. Okay, so I don't want to promise anything we can't deliver or that ultimately doesn't work because you all don't want it. But my sense is it'll probably be some form of either in-person meetings, using virtual space, a hybrid, possibly not even doing any of that, but using social media like Twitter or other social media platforms to connect, but having some way that these topics turn into things we work on all year. Okay, makes sense? And the goal of all of that, beyond that it would make you all feel better and more responsive to your schools, because you'd be working on some things you really think are interesting or important, would be that next year, any of you sitting here today could be somebody who's presenting just like these guys did. Okay, so just keep all that in mind as I talk for the next 30, 40 minutes or so. Okay. So we've heard a lot of, I think, really powerful stories, and not just stories. I mean, stories really matter. I'm a storyteller. I'm someone who loves the telling of stories, and I think we need them. We need narrative that allows us to, not just grind it out like we all can do. We've had narratives that I think have been built around things that we don't always do in school mental health, like data, like needs assessment, like we heard from the restorative practices presentation, talking about readiness, really. How ready were your schools to do any of this stuff? I mean, one of the things Lisa did that it was so interesting to me was, as she learned more about restorative practices, she noticed that people in your school were just slapping restorative on anything, right? Like a brand name, right? And those things weren't always restorative at all, or in some ways were misleading to say that. Scarlett's presentation was clearly caught up in what do we do based on where we are, okay? Not what we think should happen, but what's actually happening and how do we move that forward? And in all of the presentations in different ways, and sometimes maybe not even being aware of it, talked about school leadership and how school leadership is or isn't going to be able to jump and run with this, that you may have to prepare them, you may have to make the case to them. Those things. So a lot of being in a place to implement some of the work we've talked about is going to require the ability to think about using our narrative powers, our relational powers, in ways that may stretch us. And I think we've seen some great examples of that today. Okay, so where do we go from here? Hopefully we're not feeling too much of this. I'm feeling more of that kind of happy exhaustion. I'm not necessarily feeling very unsure. Though I am also feeling pretty clear that where I want to go this year and where I think our group wants to go is very much going to be driven by all of you. I mean, one of the things that Hanover just said, which I love about them, is they are very much trying always to be driven by student voice. And we want to be, as a program, as an FSPP program, we want to be driven by practitioner voice. What are the things that you all think are necessary to do your job even better than you already are doing it? So some of the practice wisdom nuggets that I've picked up along the way, some of these are from the 2 days, some of them are from other places. I think to be visible, valuable, and vital, Sometimes, and Sybil Baker here today has got a lot of expertise in self-care and vicarious trauma, and she's going to be building, with my help and maybe some of you, a part of the schoolsocialwork.net website devoted to self-care in the coming year. And we're going to really try to emphasize that. And I think there is something to be said for, and some of you even posted online resources. I think, Stacy, you did one that looked really cool that I checked out, where we need to attend to ourselves before we can attend to everybody else, right? That's the equivalent of, being in the airplane and you put the oxygen mask on yourself before you take care of the kid next to you. I think some of that is really about kind of inner life and psychic calm. But there's also some things about just having a job context that's less insane, right? It isn't just about how you feel. It's about the external world that you happen to show up to every day. Having that be less chaotic, feel less like you're in that reactive mode I talked about yesterday and that you're asserting into it. So one of the ways to do that, I think, is to have entrance and exit criteria for how people get involved with you, right? That it's important to think about in the context I'm in. I want to be one of those people when everybody sits around the table and says, well, the social worker should do this, that I have a response that's more than just saying, well, I'm really busy, or what I think a lot of us do, which is we say yes and then we feel guilty or resentful later, right? We need to have other responses that are driven by data, that are driven by our practice expertise, that are recognizable to the school context. And one of the ones that I think we have a long way to go on is creating clear entrance and exit criteria for what we do. I think another piece within that, which I'm fascinated, if people have examples of this, please email me. I want to interview you. I want to feature you. I don't think it's as black and white as entrance and exit, right? I mean, there is a very real issue of kids being on caseloads forever. And whether that's a justice issue, whether that's effective or not, there's a lot of ways to look at that. There's examples from the Hanover experience where there are families that episodically are on and off your caseload for a long time. And that's of value. I don't think you guys are keeping people on for no good reason. But in schools, we do a lot of just having kids on because they've been on a long time. And schools are loath to take them off. So I don't want to make that sound like that's not important, because it is, but almost as important and very elusive, and this feels a bit like I'm kind of hunting the white whale in Moby Dick or something, is people who've actually taught their school community how to view their services as at levels of service. All right? Now we have a 3-tier model. That's not exactly what I'm talking about. It could probably be adapted. But for instance, most community mental health providers, most even private practitioners these days, are essentially assessing their clients when they come in for, is this going to be an intensive case, meaning I see them X number of sessions? Is this somebody that I'm going to do a very time-limited brief treatment with, which might be considered an acute situation? Is this somebody that I might kind of do 10 sessions with and then renegotiate based on insurance, based on other issues, right? Does anybody have a version of that in their district right now? Just, I don't want to sound too pie in the sky. Okay. I would love next year to have like 5 of you have one and come up here and talk about it. Because I really think that combined with entrance and exit criteria and the ability to measure what you do has a lot of self-care built into it. I mean, it's also, I think, going to help your kids, but it's also going to make you feel like you're able to do your job better. The next thing is having 3 go-to sources for data collection. Now, why 3? 3 implies that there's the ability to create a triangle, right? And we just heard from some family therapists, and triangles mean different things to family therapists. Triangulating your data is a typical way that people who do behavior analysis and do various other things involving data analysis in schools often try to create. That the idea that you could have a student and you could have an ODR part of the triangle, you could have their grades, and you could have some self-report, observational scale, what have you, okay? There's no magic to which of the 3 there are. I mean, obviously it matters what school you're in and what data you have available. But why are those, why 3? Well, the first thing is that the 2 I just mentioned, 2 of the 3 I just mentioned should require very little effort on your part. They should be things that the school already collects, that again, that almighty secretary who controls the data, if you make friends with him or her, they can get it to you. All right, sometimes you don't even have to do that. It's just available through Swiss or AimsWeb or whatever you all are on, Infinite Campus. That becomes one data source. The next one could be another thing that's collected at the school level. The third one is the one that's more labor intensive. That's the one where you do have to either get the parent to fill it out, the kid to fill it out, you do it yourself, what have you. What's good about that is those three data sources, if you define a present level of functioning, right? So that's your baseline stuff. This is back to our 506, 606 research classes here at Loyola. So I didn't mean to cause anybody any trauma on that. But when you think about a baseline, that's really what you're doing. You're saying this is where the kid is at the beginning. And I want to establish how many times he's been removed. I want to establish what his grades are at the start. And I want to establish on the depression inventory what his score was, all right? And then I want to do it again in 3 months, 4 months, end of the year, whatever you decide to do. The good part about those three data sources is they don't talk to each other unless you make them talk to each other, right? Like nobody, the ODRs and the GPA obviously don't talk to each other at all because they're just, you know, the statistics that come up. But even the scale isn't dependent on those other things. And if you have the ability to say, based on my interventions, those three things moved into the right direction, that's data that's powerful, right? And I'm just picking three things that I typically see people do. A lot of people use the acronym BAG, behavior, attendance, grades, okay? And there's some interesting debate that I want to go into because we all want to go home eventually soon about whether it's a good idea to focus on things like attendance, which we don't always have as much impact on as we'd like, or grades, which we may, again, Lisa told the story about keeping the kid in class without acting out, and he's still not doing well in the class. That would not be somebody you want to rate grades on, right? So I don't want to make it sound like it has to be monolithic for you, but to have the ability to say, I have go-to data sources. And then guess what happens? You can bring those to meetings. You can be waving those around saying, well, based on how I evaluate my services, this is what I do, right? Okay. Oops, and I gave myself a shot ahead. This one's really important too, and I think we heard a lot of examples of it over the last 2 days. Being in productive teams. All of us have meetings. All of us probably have various feelings of comfort or disgust with meetings. But being in productive teams, being in teams that get things done, being in teams that you can feel you're able to be in touch, as I was saying about the Hanover guys, that you hear about the needs, right? So being in those teams, thinking about that. These are all ways to be visible, vital, and valuable based on what we've seen. All right, just a couple ideas, so a couple things to take with you and think about. This came from my colleagues. I'll be sharing some work from them. Midwest PBIS people, they presented here before, Allie Hearn, Amy Flamini, Sherry Luking. Some of you may know them. I love them. This came from a quote by them. Whatever next step you take one. All right. There's an old saying about 3 frogs on a log, and 1 frog decided to jump. How many frogs are still on the log? Well, 3, because the frog just decided. The frog didn't jump, right? So take that step, whatever that is this year, right? Do it. Certainly, one of the things you're about to be offered and invited to do is to partner with us, me, and others as part of our PLC project that can do some work to help you with this. But also, what's the Hanover equivalent, if there is one? There probably isn't, but there's some version of Hanover in your community, or there's some version of other types of services. How can you partner with them? How can you partner? I'm a big fan, and I'm by no means talking about any political view on this, but I'm a big fan in a lot of communities I worked in learning what the church clergy resources are and partnering with them. That's a huge resource we often don't tap because we're concerned about church state and things like that, and we should be. But we also need to know that that's where a lot of our kids and their families are going, and we need to be able to access them. So just some thoughts about that. That's another way, obviously, that you will become very visible because you'll be showing up in community meetings, or you'll be bringing community people in, and you'll be introducing them to your principal and all that stuff that happens. Figure out what skills your staff need and be a facilitator in helping them get those skills, all right? Most of you could probably, if you have a relationship with a principal or a dean or whoever you work with that way, if you sat them down and got them talking, they could probably tell you within 10, 15 minutes what they do and don't like about the teachers in your school, right? Probably some of them would be pretty blunt. Now, I'm not saying you do that to just, dish on them, I'm saying, what are the skill deficits that people have? I mean, I love the story Kathleen told this morning about seeing a second grade as a grade that was really in crisis, right? Like this was a grade that was not doing well, right? And how easy that is to turn into blame, to turn into teachers that projected on the kids, administrators that say, well, what's wrong with the second grade, right? And instead, what Kathleen did again and again and showed you was not only did she not buy into that, but she used data and she used her own practice, her own consultation to keep bringing back to the teachers. I love that last slide you did about test scores and things like that, because one of the things, and anybody here who's a teacher or married to a teacher or has lived this, know you can work your butt off as a teacher in second grade and feel like you got nowhere, and all of a sudden it's third grade, the kids are kicking ass grade-wise, right? And that's a very stressful thing. Teachers all know this, and it's one of the reasons they're very anxious about having their pay and their status tied to about achievement, because a lot of times actual progress kicks in later. We know that in our own work, but so you were able to model to them, even though you felt like you were in, you know, the valley of the shadow of death at times, you were actually, things were happening, right? And there was real achievement happening. Take the things you've heard here, some of the things we're going to try to create this year, and share them with staff. One of the things that you probably figured out already as we've been talking is we're very interested in things that are free, not because free means cheap and we think they're not important, but what we also know is that we don't want to ever endorse the kind of strain of thinking that says, here's something really great, here's something really evidence-based, oh, by the way, it's $5,000 and your district has to hire us, okay? I just think we have to not do that. I mean, you know, I can speak for myself. I'm at a university. I'm incentivized to create things, right? I mean, I don't have to create things and then sell them on top of it. Like I can give away whatever interventions I come up with, and I want to. And the good news is there's a lot of people that, more than me, that think that way. The problem is that a lot of times where we fall short is we don't make it easily accessible for all of you, and we need to do that. And obviously, we're inviting you to stay connected with us, and that's why I want to kind of talk about this last piece. So what would it mean to expand your toolbox? I think you've gotten a lot of examples of that. I think you've been invited through the wonderful projects you've heard to see how other people are doing that. This is work drawing from a presentation I did last year with Allie Hearn. And this is, the title of the presentation was The Changing Role of the School-Based Clinician. So I'm just going to run through. I'm probably not going to hit every slide or give every slide a lot of time because I want to get us to the concluding time. But I want you to think about these things a little bit, maybe stretch yourself a little bit in thinking about some of the things we've done today and yesterday and how this might fit in. All right, so I have to have one triangle slide. It's compulsory, sorry. All right, so okay, I got it done, it's over. So in the beginning stage, pre-FTSS, basically what we had was, we could send a student with any concern to all of you at any time, right? Probably to some extent that's still true. Once that happened, subjective decision-making, not data-driven decision-making, subjective decision-making was largely driving what supports that kid got, okay? And again, I lived this myself for 14 years. A lot of what that turned into is a teacher, a parent, a dean, so as an adult. I don't know about you, but I found kids were actually pretty good at making referrals to them for themselves. I don't know about you. When kids really needed to see you, they needed to see you. And very often, if they got what they needed, they were like, yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Kelly, I'm done, right? That didn't seem to happen as much with the adults. The adults would say, you need to see John, you need to see John, and they kept saying it, even if John was like, yeah, I don't really need to see you, okay? So we have this external source that largely dictates who we see in schools. And then when I teach my school students every fall, one of the things I say is one of the things you're in for, unlike maybe some other fields you could be in, is almost every client you have will start as a mandated client, right? Somebody else, usually an adult, decided they needed to see you. And we all know to some extent what that feels like if anyone's ever told you to do something, right? So what we want to have is the ability to think about what that process is. And it's a largely subjective one. It's an adult usually that's decided that the sky is falling, this kid is crazy, this parent is crazy, you need to fix it, all right? Then when the process starts of whatever that is, treatment, consultation, observation, you're then asked during some sort of update meeting, how does George do with you in your office, right? Now, there's a lot of problems with that. First of all, sometimes it's just a straight up confidentiality issue. It's like, well, it's none of your business what he's doing in my office because, you know, he doesn't want me to tell you what I'm talking about. But leaving aside confidentiality issues, the other issue is, and this was a serious issue for me, I've talked about it a lot. I was pretty good, as I'm sure all of you are, I was pretty good at helping kids get along with me in my office. You know, generally, not all. Some kids were like, oh shit, I got to see Mr. Kelly again. But in general, kids liked coming. Maybe because they liked that out of class, or maybe they really liked it, or maybe they're getting something out of it. But many of those kids, and this is where I kind of hit a wall in my own practice, and I realized that I had to work on, I had visibility down pretty well from the beginning, but the valuable and vital I was not clear on at all. And one of the reasons was that I was pretty good at getting kids to feel comfortable with me, to understand that they could talk to me, that they could tell me things, and we could work on things. But they could very often go back to class and do the same damn thing that got them sent to me. Sometimes literally right then, right? So I would be asked questions like this sometimes that would feel a little accusatory. You know, I don't know if you've ever had a teacher do that, where they, how does George do with you? Because boy, that kid doesn't do anything I want him to do. And you've been seeing him and he runs out the door to see you. And boy, he doesn't seem to be getting better. And at one level, I think we can feel a bit, you know, challenged, but at the same time, as we've heard the last 2 days, we are in a host setting. We're in a school where the other business, having kids be ready to learn, having kids behave, having kids be able to get along with each other, is the primary mission of the school. It's not that they have a therapeutic outcome, right? I mean, obviously that matters, but that's not what the kids come to school every day for. All right, so that was the beginning. Meanwhile, while you're being asked all that, at any point, a principal, a dean, whoever can pull a fire alarm, and you're expected to do all these other things. So again and again, we hear people are proctoring tests, people are without volunteering for it, you know, working lunch duty, you know, things like that. Okay, so this is the pre-MTSS era. Maybe it's still the era you're in. So what could it look like? I've already said referral process and entrance and exit criteria. I think we're getting there, and there were some great examples on the forum page. Please go look at them, of people that are using Google Docs and other things to be user-friendly in their progress monitoring. And then teams. We've talked about behavioral health teams before in CPS and other places. Tier 1 and Tier 2 teams. Those are the kinds of places where you can be very impactful, but not necessarily be doing that Tier 3, what I call see the kid, fix the kid practice. And then obviously being on the radar of your school stakeholders. So they see you in all the variance and richness that you actually are. They don't just see you as the firefighter, the EMT, right? They see you as someone who has a lot of ability to make a difference. So here's the evolution that we're aspiring to go from magic wand to facilitator, all right? To be one of many. Maybe first among equals in terms of being a capacity builder, but be somebody who's seen as a person who leads, who doesn't necessarily do it all, right? For obvious reasons. One, we don't have the time and we'll get burned out. Secondly, it's not really in service of, if we really are embracing a 3-tier framework, we need to be building the capacity through the stuff Kathleen talked about, through the stuff Lucia's talking about. A lot of the presentations were about building capacity of other adults in the building. All right. So we're not going to do this in the interest of time, but I want you to think about it. And these slides are all up there too, so you can download these and use these. If you were to take time and put your work in each of the tiers, you know, what work would be there? So just do a little thought experiment, think about that. In addition to that, for that work, what work in this does not have data attached to it to demonstrate its effectiveness? All right. Again, a visible, valuable, vital way to screen yourself is to say, if I am very active in a Tier 3 context, which is a caseload context, maybe a crisis intervention context, do I have data that shows what that set of interventions does? Do I have those 3 data sources, the bag data, whatever it is? If I have Tier 2 groups, as we heard about today, SAIG groups or check and check out, as we heard yesterday from Caitlin, do I have data to show what's going on there? And hopefully there's some Tier 1 data that you don't have to just have yourself, but that others could providing through the school office. So again, this is kind of the project we're in right now, is looking at visibility, value, and vitality within our work. We have always been these things: teachers, consultants, coordinators, and facilitators. The next era that we're in, which I think we're already in, is the knowing when and where to do each function of the role. And that's the challenge, is I think we've had a one-size-fits-all approach, particularly in states like ours, that has had a heavily defined identity around clinical work and around special ed clinical work specifically. All right, so what does it look like to be active in these different parts of the tiers? So the tier that we'll always be involved in, that we should never let go of, honestly, because there are other disciplines that envy the clinical work we do, is the facilitator role, that we're the people that either do the service or make sure the service gets done, maybe to an agency like Hanover. That's the red one. The parts that I think we've often been unsure how to do, or we've honestly just not been given the freedom to do within our context, we heard some good examples of this last 2 days. This idea of being in coordination, where you put together a Mind Yeti program and you put it into a classroom, and you don't do it per se, but you get it in there. Now, as Lucia, you said, there was this issue of, well, I'm not the one doing it. I want to have a better sense of what it's doing, right? So in some ways, you want to also be maybe doing some of that yourself, right? But the value of programs that we can do, the value of our reach, our visibility, our vitality, is to the extent we get other adults also doing things that are in line with our goals. And the final one that I think we've often been very anxious about, and I'm going to talk about now, is this idea of being teachers, right? Of actually stepping into a role where we claim some expertise in function-based thinking, in classroom management. And again, some of you sitting here today may say, I don't know much about that at all, okay? And part of what you're going to be invited to do is, if you want to sign up for one of the PLCs that we're going to maybe put together, we can probably address that. But my guess is that a lot of you do have expertise in classroom management and function-based thinking. But most of it has been parked specifically around maybe writing FBAs and BIPs. And I want to challenge you a little bit as we wind up today to think about extending yourself. All right. So here's just some examples. Again, a slide you've probably seen in different ways, but I just want to highlight how this would actually look. And you can go get this off the slides now. People that are really using data tools at various places have the ability to work it into the various tiers. Interventions can, as you can see, can be used at various levels of intensity. What's so interesting, without using the language, is a lot of the work that that Amanda's group does at Alternative Suspension has a real wraparound quality to it. You know, that you're doing a lot of wraparound. You identify a complex set of needs for kids. You give them an experience where they feel listened to and cared for. You reach their parents and you explain that to the school, right? And that's a lot of wraparound values, all right? But a lot of what we do, I think, in schools is we have a kid who's referred and all of a sudden they're down here at the tip, right? And some kids will need to be there, but could we have some things we do before they get there? All right, so I've given you this checklist already. The one I do just want to emphasize again is this referral process. I really feel like that if we can find ways, and some of you are here with people from your district, and some of you are in positions of leadership already, if we can find a way in the next 5 years to make referrals to school social work less subjective, less driven by that principle or, you know, what day it is, I think that's going to go a long way in making us both visible, but also affecting our ability to be effective. There's our man, Dan, and he was very clear about how he did visibility. I love that picture of him with those two guys. And he did that open house. The valuable idea, a couple things I want to highlight here. This difference between being compliance driven, which we all have to be to some extent, we have to get paperwork done, with being outcomes driven, where we define for ourselves first what it is we want to measure about what we do and get that baseline and then do that post-test. And then once we have that data, maybe engage somebody like me or Andy or other people here today who have expertise in that and do some program evaluation. And then, you know, assuming there's good data to share, get it out there, shout it from the rooftops. But that's a different set of perspective than just saying I have to get my paperwork done, right? Which we all feel. But how do you plan in advance? Like for instance, one example, people aren't here from Evanston today, but one thing they were doing that I really liked when I worked with them a couple of years ago is they were part of that kind of world of having initial teacher evals applied to them, like Danielson framework, things like that. And they basically said, we're going to identify in our caseload 10 to 20 kids. And we're going to get that baseline and we're going to follow them. And then we're going to use those 20 kids as our example of our effectiveness, right? And I deliberately coach them. I don't mind saying this, and even having this go out into the wide world of the 3 people that are probably watching right now. I told them, pick your 20 best kids. Pick the kids you think you're making a difference with. You know, why not, right? Be able to tell your story that way. And then this last one that I think is really important, last 2, and this is the work that you've seen for the last 2 days that's so impressive, is have you identified a key problem that other people in the school are concerned about, right? So you heard a lot of examples, I won't restate them. And have you mobilized the school to do something about it, which again, clearly the people you heard the last 2 days have done. And what would you say then are those outcomes that you address? And I think if you start with this idea that you're going to define a problem and really make it one, don't make it, you know, too many because you get lost in it. You can then say, based on what I've done about it, here's the outcomes that have come from it. The one I want to just highlight from here, and this is one that's always fun to think about in the summer when you don't actually have to talk to this principal or superintendent or sped director for a while, is what are the things that they're evaluated on? What are the things that they are urgently concerned about? One of the best pieces of advice, my answer to things my mentor taught me, which I haven't gotten on there yet. I have to put my own up there. One of the ones I got that was really, really very helpful and I used all 14 years of my work is in the summer, make an appointment to go see your principal. You know, obviously they need to be there, you need to be there. They'll be a little more relaxed. They'll be maybe not so busy. And just go and kind of put that clinical skills hat on and not do, you know, I'm not talking you have to do analysis or therapy or anything, but basically be an active listener and ask them kind of the questions that Amanda and her team were asking up here. What are the needs for this year? What are your goals for this year? What are you looking to do, right? They'll often be able to tell you right away because they're often themselves evaluated on that. They may have a school improvement plan or whatever we're calling them these days. Have that conversation when the bombs aren't going off all around you, because then you can say, okay, so what she really wants is these 2 things. And how can what I do relate to that? How can I make it relate, right? And that's where I think we begin to become not just valuable, but vital. Because then that person who is themselves often very stressed and running around can say, yeah, wow, I know that Kathleen does this and I need that, and that's a real asset. I'll never forget, there was a principal who I work with, she was a very charismatic, very powerful person. And I never really felt that she fully knew what to do with school social work in a way that we might sit here and say, geez, the principal really needs to use this better. But because she had this force of personality, she had a school social worker, I was working there as well. And she once said to me, just in the lunchroom, she said, you know, I'm not really sure what you guys do, but the school's better because you're here. And I was like, okay, all right, I'll stay with that. But again, what would make your people say that, right? I think there's ways to say that even a little more concretely than people. So here's Caitlin again. A lot of what I've identified already are some of those steps that this PLC project has taken. I think these things are absolutely transferable, and they're things we haven't done the research yet to get it published, but I think when you have the needs assessment, the data collection piece, the alliance building, the intervention itself, the outcome measurement, and the social marketing piece, I think it's reasonable to hypothesize that from that can come visibility, value, and vitality. All right. But what are the other skills? And that's what I want to talk about for just a couple minutes. Why does being an expert on classroom management benefit our staff? They're absolutely looking for it. They may not know the look for it from you. They may not be talking about it openly. A lot of when I hear teachers complaining, what they're really saying is, I don't know how to handle this kid, right? They may use other language, but that's really what they're saying. We know that when There's strong management in classrooms. Kids learn more. The climate gets better because there's just less complaining. There's less of that gallows humor. Teachers feel a sense of achievement themselves, and that is contagious. Kids then achieve more because teachers come more fired up. There's more creativity. So I'm not going to go into this stuff because I want to rush through it a little bit, but these are examples, and you can go get all these from some of the work that Allie and her team do about some very specific things you can decide this year to teach teachers, like specific positive feedback, all right? Error correction, all right? An activity that you could do is the self-assessment that is available on their site for free. Again, it's another one of my favorite people that does free. And that assessment allows them to think about some of these issues in relation to classroom management in a way that isn't in that urgent moment of this kid's crazy, you have to fix this kid. Function-based thinking. Again, how many of you are responsible for at least part of the FBAs and BIPs in your district? Okay. All right. The first thing I want to say is that needs to change. The fact that not everybody's hand went up. Right? I know that the school psychs have often carved this out as their fiefdom. And I imagine the last thing you want to hear from some guy at 3:40 on Saturday in the summer is, here's more work for you. But those kids, those FBAs are your kids. They're on your caseload. Everybody's gonna be looking at you for what happens to that kid. We gotta be in on that. We gotta be in the beginning. We gotta write those. I mean, we don't have to be the only people writing them. Certainly I don't wanna take it on just without any support, but you should be in the room. And part of how you get in the room is you have function-based thinking to offer people. Again, when teachers know how to think about function, it's a nice example that Paul shared earlier about this idea of expected and unexpected behavior. I always flinched, and I love that you helped me think about that today, Paul. I had teachers that, I knew them enough personally to know that like their favorite sport was to just be judgmental of everyone. And sure enough, their favorite language around kids was appropriate, inappropriate. And guess what? They used inappropriate a lot more than appropriate. And it was a shaming thing for them. It was absolutely that. So how do we help teachers deal with the very real frustration they feel of kids that won't sit down, that won't do their work, that won't stop talking back, and use it as a function-based thinking opportunity? And again, a lot of you have these skills. And so my challenge to you, those of you who didn't raise your hand and say, I write the FBAs and BIPs, is how do you get that knowledge more into your work role? So the F word is function. And again, I'm not going to do all this. Some of you have this. I don't want to be remedial today, but this is a nice summary that they've done that they've allowed me to use that gets at the ABC process. And I love the phrase, if we can predict it, we can prevent it. One of the things I like to do beyond just get teachers and the rest of the adults to calm down about a kid who's often, makes us feel very emotional, is to talk about predicting what the behavior will be next time, right? And honestly, for some teachers, that's really hard to do when they're really caught up in it, right? They just, I just don't know. He just seems like he's just out of control. But if you slow down with them and say, well, okay, do you have a sense of when he's most out of control? Usually they can tell you. Well, it's like he comes out of his house and it's 8 a.m. He's just going, right? So now you're talking about morning, talking about the first thing. All right. Again, these are examples of things that you can certainly look at, the positive, negative reinforcement, ways that people behave to obtain, to avoid, to escape. Okay, we heard through Scarlett a different version of this in terms of how we look at conflict. But again, as you were just doing that thing with Ruth today where you're walking her through, like that's the kind of stuff we need to be doing with teachers, right? Like if teachers are just allowed to do what anyone would do when you're frustrated, which is vent, and that's all it is, that's not a problem-solving conversation, right? That's often, honestly, a conversation that can quickly bleed into, okay, so you get your magic wand, Scarlett, and you go fix this kid, and you tell me how it goes. Again, some of you have seen this already. If you came a couple years to our training here, you saw this, the competing behavior pathway. Again, not to be too remedial or on this, but one of the things that we can absolutely do this year, if people want to go in deep on this stuff, we can do this. We can get into this in a PLC. Because the big thing that we need to do that is hard to do, I mean, this is not easy stuff, is it's not enough to just punish a behavior. Obviously, for a lot of reasons, that doesn't work for kids. There has to be a replacement behavior that's created, right? Kids have to be built into making these behavior changes. And part of that is the real issue, which is a paradox for some of us, is it's really about changing the behavior of the adults. And that can be really hard to communicate because it's easy for that to be taken to mean, well, are you saying I'm the problem? Why are you picking on me? This kid, his dad's a drunk and his family's moved 5 times in the last 3 years. Like, you're telling me I need to look at my classroom management? But if we have a school that commits to function-based thinking, the classrooms themselves begin to adjust. Those are the classrooms that aren't sweating you guys having those calm classroom kits because they've acknowledged there are kids that need them. It would change how they ask you for help because they'd be pulling the fire alarm less often and they'd be bringing you more, what do you think of this? And you might have more success with those FBAs and BIPs. So again, this is about changing adult behavior. So one of the now what's could be, how do I take this stuff I've learned the last 2 days, look at my own stuff, which we've invited you to do, but how can I change the behavior, maybe the adults in my school? Okay. So again, these are examples of what it might look like at different tiers. A lot of this is available completely for free on their site, and go get it today. All right, so here we are. We are back. Again, this is a resource if you want to check it out. You can maybe get some ideas off of that. I want to talk for just a minute about some of the things we found from the time study, because I think there are some things to learn from it. We are certainly going to continue doing a time study project. It's going to look a little different this year in that we're going to try to develop this app. We're going to try to create a PLC if people are interested, where we do it together and look at it. The app realistically probably won't be ready until next year, so it'll still be being scored by you manually. But this is the data that I showed you yesterday, that people can be actually able to sort out what time they do. So you get out of your own jet stream and be able to say, this is what I actually do. You might be able to even chart this and see trends in your data. What if some of you who are in big enough departments said, we're all going to do this together? We're all going to look at our data. We're not going to tell anybody this year. So we're not going to tell our special ed boss or anybody else. So we're not, this is our data. What if you did that? What would you do with them? This is how all these different professionals, how their jobs were, how their different caseloads were, and how their different versions of this went. Some of the benefits, people had self-reflection come from this. People had other conversations with people like us. People were able to use this in field, certainly I'm using it in research, but also in advocacy. And we heard an example from somebody who had this actually turned into people getting a job position added in a rural area in Illinois. We had people in the Michigan project that got a good response in a similar way. The workload caseload issue is absolutely something I want to take on. I would love your help with it. And the study that we did that I won't go into too much right now was we wanted to know, like, how did self-efficacy get affected? Because a lot of, if you haven't kind of tracked this yet, a big part of the 3 V's is self-efficacy, right? If you leave today saying, yeah, I do some of these things. I want to do more of them. I never thought of that. I want to talk to Kathleen. I want to talk to Danielle. I want to talk to Paul, because I want to hear how they did it. You're beginning to think about yourself as having more self-efficacy. So these are the things that people learned. The first one was that they definitely wanted to be in this project because they wanted to improve their practice, which I think obviously you all are here for that reason as well. They also wanted to be able to advocate. They wanted to turn around and use this data for good. They also, and I should have said this before, we have really good feasibility data on this tool that people said they really liked it and they used it. And there's one person here, Lisa, raise your hand again if you don't mind. Lisa was a part of that project the last 2 years, and she can tell you about it. But people found it useful. It wasn't just this thing that was being imposed on them. It was also voluntary. So that's why I'm thinking it would be cool if some of you plotted to do it within your departments and didn't even tell your principal yet. And then the last one that I shared before, we have this issue with all this indirect service, which is not being accounted for, that we don't get any credit for, that we know somewhere in there we do. And people experience that as very validating. They experience that as, wow, it's like you're being seen, right? Like, this is what I actually do, right? When I'm serving all these complicated kids, this is how the time actually looks. All right. So before we wind up, and I'll get off the headset in a minute, what I'd like you to do is think about these ideas about where you might want to take the work in the coming year. We are committed to having a meeting in October. We haven't set the date yet because our group hasn't yet settled on that we will meet in October with our plan for what we want to offer all of you to maybe be sitting here next year sharing out the cool stuff you've done. And that will be, I think we've decided it'll be both in person and virtual. So people will have the chance to do one or the other, because we know it can be challenging for people to get downtown. And we really encourage you to think about that. And if you're interested, join us. But before that, we do ask before you leave that you do go to that forum and give us your top 3 of those 8, okay? The other 2 things I just want to say quickly before I say goodbye to the live stream is that we also are really interested, if people want to, in having you join us for the certificate program, which again, several of you asked me about it, thinking about it. That is a 4-credit, 15-credit program. You need to, it would be good if you let me know even before you leave today if you're interested, or send me an email so that I'm ready for you on that. Applications are due by August 15th, but ideally I'd like to know if I've got enough people potentially to think about running it. Right now we're at a place where we've got 7 people and I need 10. I've been told by my bosses I need 10. So if there's any of you thinking, I can push them over the finish line, all of the stuff we've just talked about, obviously we're going to go very in depth on. A lot of it would be directly with me, but also some of the colleagues that I've worked with over the years. The second thing that several of you have already said you're interested in is I'm looking for people that might want to be consultation group leaders. Now, this is a different part of the work. This is you agreeing, because you have an LCSW, to essentially provide clinical consultation to a group of people, no more than 5, who would be looking to get their clinical license. Right? Historically, we've done that as a program. We haven't done it for the last couple of years, just the groups haven't filled. If people are interested in that, we know that a lot of you are in positions where you had to pay for that out of pocket separately. Our commitment is to not make that a very expensive cost. This is not me looking to pay for a deck or something like that. This would be a very low cost option. We haven't set the fee just yet, but historically, we've not done it for very much money. It would be done by people who really want to provide this to their school social work, school mental health colleagues. We already had 2 people express interest in doing it. I mean, you will get paid something. It's be worth your time. But if you're interested in doing that, and you have an LCSW, come up and sign up something with me. Okay. So those are the last pieces that I wanted to make sure that I said before I say goodbye to the live stream. Sybil, are you on there? Is there any questions?
No questions.
4 people. God bless all 4 of you. Hi, Mom. Hi, whoever else decided to come. Actually, I think my mom wasn't even coming today, so sorry. She's had the list of me for 49 years almost. So, all right. So I'm going to end that recording and end the meeting.